Hello everyone. Tonight we are going to pass through a very peculiar portal. A portal that does not shine, nor emit mystical sounds. In fact, it is made of rough stone and aged wood, with a smell of moss and smoke hanging in the air. Imagine yourself walking down a narrow street in medieval Europe, perhaps Paris, or London, or Florence. It doesn't matter. What matters is the cold that escapes through the cracks in your clothes, the creaking of the carriages, and that strange awareness that here, any day could be your last. It is hard to imagine, for those of us who live surrounded by technology and medical care, how the simple act of surviving a single day was already a remarkable feat for a peasant or even a medieval bourgeois. It was not just violence. It was the sum total of small pitfalls of everyday life. A misinterpreted sneeze, a poorly stored loaf of bread, a delayed bath, a smile displayed at the wrong moment. Every aspect of life was tinged with a collective fear. Disease and superstition walked hand in hand, while time seemed to slip through the cracks in the stone. This was not a rational fear. It was a dense fear, embedded in the walls, in the clothes, and in the bodies themselves, an invisible companion that insinuated itself into the most banal moment. Today, we sleep on comfortable mattresses, with clean blankets and immediate access to a doctor should anything happen to us. But in that Europe of dark alleys and smoky taverns, a simple physical inconvenience had become a sentence, and at any moment, an innocent gesture could be seen as a sign of possession, or worse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And if you want, share in the comments where you're watching us from tonight, and what time it is there. It's always comforting to imagine this silent network of curious minds spread across the world. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a small lamp or turn on a white noise machine to create a soft, steady background. Wrap yourself in your nighttime retreat and come with me, because tonight we're going to find out why you and I probably wouldn't have lasted a single day in medieval Europe either. Imagine you are walking down a medieval street. The damp stones beneath your feet slip slightly. The smell of burning wood mixes with less pleasant odors that float between the cramped houses. The windows, if we can call them that, are closed with crooked boards, and a grey veil of smoke seems to hang perpetually in the air. It is just another day, or so you thought. Suddenly, in the midst of this haze of sounds and smells, you feel that familiar itch in your nose, and before you can stop it, a sneeze echoes, loud, clear, inevitable. In modern times, someone might say good morning to you, a nice gesture, but in medieval Europe, the scenario could change in the blink of an eye. What for you is just a natural reflex, for those around you could be a sign that something evil was living in your body. After all, diseases were seen as divine punishment, or even worse, as the work of occult forces. The plague, which so often devastated entire villages, had no face, no comprehensible logic, and fear that was a constant visitor, always ready to accuse. On streets where panic lurked behind every corner, a sneeze was not just a sound, it was a warning. The look of a superstitious neighbor could become a denunciation. The collective mind, always eager to find someone to blame, began to work. Who else sneezed? Where did you come from? Maybe you passed by the house where the last child died. Maybe you touched something you shouldn't have. Questions didn't need answers. Doubt was enough to start the fire. While today we protect ourselves with vaccines and understand the causes of a cold, in those days there was no such safety. Doctors wore long black robes and long-beaked masks filled with aromatic herbs to try to ward off miasma, believing that the disease spread through the tainted air. And in this surreal setting, a simple bodily gesture could condemn someone. If you were in a smaller village, the sentence would be even swifter, because there, misinformation ran faster than any horse. The sounds of the streets reinforced the tension. Carriages creaked heavily. Bells tolled announcing recent deaths. The lament of families mixed with the cries of merchants who, despite their fear, continued their sales. And in the midst of all this, a sudden sneeze echoed like silent thunder, breaking the fragile balance between fear and resignation. It was like lighting a candle in a barn full of dry hay. Panic spread with frightening speed. Today, we carry bottles of hand sanitizer in our pocket. We have access to antibiotics, hospitals, and information. It's hard to imagine that such a common symptom could mean the end. But perhaps with the next involuntary sneeze, you'll briefly remember those dark times. And perhaps you'll feel a small, silent gratitude for living in an era where science sheds a little more light on the dark corners of human fear. Close your eyes for a moment, if you like. Imagine those streets, those people, the oppression of the unknown hanging in the air. And take a deep breath, feeling the comfort of being here, now, in a time when a simple sneeze is no longer an invitation to the bonfire. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself walking through a medieval village on a cold evening. The air is filled with the smell of wood smoke, dampness, and, unfortunately, something more pungent, more human. The people around you are wrapped in heavy, unwashed clothing. There is a reason for this. In the imagination of that time, water was not a symbol of purity. It was a treacherous medium that could open invisible doors to disease. It was believed that a hot bath would dilate the pores, allowing spirits and evil spirits floating in the air to enter. Bathing frequently was seen as, at the very least, foolish. Public bathhouses, once popular in cities like Paris and London, had become a focus of suspicion. Epidemics sweeping through the populations fueled the belief that sharing baths and steam rooms was risky. Gradually, the doors of these establishments were closed. Fear that the water could bring death outweighed any desire for cleanliness, and so people turned to safer methods. Linen cloths soaked in herbal infusions were passed over the body, but this was a ritual more symbolic than effective. Now imagine the contrast. A hot bath today is one of life's little pleasures. The steam enveloping your body, the water running freely, the scent of soaps and shampoos. All of this, to a medieval peasant, would seem not only luxurious, but incredibly risky. You might even be seen as someone unconsciously playing with invisible forces. The fear of hot water was so great that some people would go years without bathing, trusting in the fabric of their clothes and the layers of dirt as some kind of mystical protection. The seasons also shaped hygiene habits. In the harsh winter, bathing was practically non-existent. The freezing water and lack of heating made bathing a physical and emotional challenge. Even in the summer, bathing was viewed with reservations. People preferred to apply perfumes and essences, trying to mask natural odors. It was a society where the sense of smell was constantly challenged and paradoxically tolerant. What would be considered unacceptable today was, in those times, simply the aroma of everyday life. Nobles, of course, could afford certain luxury. Some castles had private bathing chambers, where water was heated in large cauldrons and poured into wooden tubs. But even among the most privileged, bathing was a rare event, reserved for special occasions or medical needs. Among the common people, the vision of regular bathing was almost utopian, and those who dared to defy convention faced the suspicious gaze of the community. Today, we can turn on a tap and within seconds enjoy clean, hot water. Science has freed us from ancient superstitions, although we may still carry a vestige of that ancient fear. There is an almost ritualistic pleasure in taking a shower after our day. It is an act of renewal, of self-care. But the next time the hot water runs down your shoulders, perhaps you will remember those souls of the past who saw every drop as an invisible threat. And so we go on, comfortably immersed in our own modern ritual. But for a brief moment, it's worth reflecting on how the simple act of bathing was a challenge, a dilemma between necessity and fear. And maybe, just maybe, it will make your next bath even more enjoyable. Imagine an ordinary day in a medieval village. The sun is still hesitant to break through the morning mist. You wake up with a growling stomach and the smell of freshly baked bread wafts through the air. A comforting sight, isn't it? Well, maybe you'll want to think again. In medieval Europe, bread was the staple food, the heart of the daily diet. But behind every golden slice lurked an invisible risk. After all, there was no quality control, no health inspection. There was only hope and a considerable dose of faith. The grains used to make bread often harbored an unwelcome guest, Claviceps purpurea, or, as it later became known, the rice spur. This fungus produced toxic alkaloids with hallucinogenic and, in larger doses, lethal effects. Eating contaminated bread could turn a simple lunch into an unexpected journey through realms, distorted colors, and necrotic limbs. Yes, you could end up with gangrene or mystical delusions, all because of an innocent piece of bread. Now imagine the scene. Hungry, you bite into that bread with its crispy crust and soft center. Soon after, the walls begin to ripple. The sky takes on hues that no one has ever described. And while you try to understand why your hands seem to belong to someone else, the entire village begins to whisper that a new plague, or perhaps witchcraft, has taken hold. It wouldn't be hard to end the afternoon accused of witchcraft or possessed by dark forces, all thanks to a fungus discreetly hidden in your morning meal. In modern times, of course, this would be unthinkable. We have expiration dates, regulatory agents, and a natural distrust of any food that doesn't come with a safety label. But back then, moldy bread was bad luck at best. And since bread was shared within families, a single contaminated batch could send an entire community into a collective panic of hallucinations and fear. And the most curious thing is that, even with so many known cases, the cycle repeated itself. Hunger does not allow for refined choices. If the bread was available, even if it smelled strange and looked dubious, it would be eaten. The alternatives were hunger or, well, a slower and more psychedelic death. Each bite was a ticket to a very dark lottery, and no one could predict the prize. So the next time you open a package of bread, you might feel a little more grateful for your modern life. A hallucinogenic fungus in your sliced bread would be cause for outrage today. But for our medieval ancestors, it was just another Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. Who knows? Hallucinations didn't help much with counting the days. Today, a button is an almost invisible detail, a small circle of plastic or metal that no one really notices. But in medieval Europe, every button, buckle, or brooch was a blatant symbol of status, literally. And it wasn't just for its aesthetics, it was for the silent message it conveyed. Having a well-made button on your clothing could mean that you wouldn't be treated like cattle at a fair. It was a visual passport to respect, or at least to not being summarily ignored. The ritual of dressing up in those days was not a routine act. Every piece of clothing, every adornment, had to be carefully chosen, within the limitations imposed by your social class. Sumptuous laws dictated what you could and could not wear. If you were a simple peasant and dared to wear something that looked like wealth, you were asking for a fine, imprisonment, or worse. But if a handmade button, inherited or somehow earned, was discreetly sewn onto your tunic, you might be able to go unnoticed, or be mistaken, even briefly, for someone of higher rank. It was a risky game, almost a daily theater. Imagine waking up before dawn, assessing your clothes with anxious eyes. Does that copper button still shine enough? Will it attract too much attention? Is it simple enough not to offend the nobles, but showy enough that you won't be treated as invisible? A true social juggling act, where aesthetics could define your day, or even your destiny. Today, of course, we dress with almost absolute freedom. Simple t-shirts, sportswear, or costumes that mix styles and eras. But for a medieval person, this would be pure visual anarchy. Every detail was observed and interpreted. The simple jingle of a brooch could indicate your connection to a guild, your position in a noble house, or even your audacity in trying to appear more than you were. And the watchful eyes of the population were as relentless as those of any guard. There is something poetically absurd about all this. The invisible power of appearance governing entire lives. Vanity as a guiding thread in everyday life. And, ironically, a simple button had more power to communicate than 1,000 words. Perhaps that is why, even today, we care so much about tiny details. The desire to be seen, to be recognized, spans the centuries with an almost moving stubbornness. So the next time you button up a shirt, pause for a moment. Feel between your fingers the silent legacy of an object that could once have been your ticket to being treated as an equal or a traitor. And smile with a hint of sarcasm, because in some ways, we haven't changed all that much. Imagine that night has fallen over the village. The sky is dotted with stars that few noted, because the darkness here is not romantic. It is oppressive. You decide that it is time to rest. After all, your tired body craves some peace. But sleeping in medieval Europe was an epic challenge, worthy of stories that are not told to children. First, find a reasonably dry corner away from drafts. Second, accept that absolute silence was a luxury reserved for the dead. And not for long. The taverns were bustling until the wee hours. Singing, fighting, the stumbling steps of drunks stumbling along the cobblestone streets. And inside the houses, the incessant creaking of floors, the crying of children, the shrill sound of rats exploring cracks and beams. Ah, the rats, unwelcome companions of practically the entire population. They were so ubiquitous that the absence of one or two in a room would, in fact, be cause for suspicion. Something wrong with the room, perhaps? Furthermore, the idea of a soft mattress was a fiction. Many slept on straw, which quickly became a haven for insects. The more fortunate had wooden beds with wool or feather mattresses, but even these accumulated a varied repertoire of smells and microscopic inhabitants. And to top off the experience, the early morning cold infiltrated without asking permission, making each night a battle between sleep and survival. Today, we lie on ergonomic mattresses, regulate the room temperature, and block out unwanted sounds with a touch of a button with white noise or meditation playlists. A medieval man would have considered this to be the height of sorcery. He had to accept the chaos of sound and sensory input as the inevitable backdrop to his rest. And if he woke up in the middle of the night, there was always the chance that he would witness some public punishment or a sudden fire. After all, candles were the norm, and wood was plentiful. Reflecting on this might make your next nap even sweeter. Imagine yourself surrounded by silence, comfort, and security, a luxury unthinkable to those who came before us. Sleeping well was not a guarantee, but a rare prize, a moment of respite in a world that did not forgive even the most human fatigue. And so, as you settle in for your peaceful night, remember that surviving until dawn was quite an achievement for a resident of old Europe. Perhaps a small smile will come to your face as you realize how privileged we are, and perhaps a little quiet gratitude will accompany your sleep. Today, a smile is an almost universal gesture, a reflection of friendliness, a personal calling card. But in medieval Europe, smiling in public could reveal more than good intentions. It could expose a deplorable state of health, or worse, open the way for harsh judgment. Oral hygiene was not exactly a priority, not because of neglect, but because of sheer lack of knowledge and resources. The concept of brushing one's teeth was as distant as the idea of space travel. The diet of the time did not help. Hard bread, salted meat, and beer were consumed in abundance. Fresh fruit, a rare luxury. Vegetables, almost non-existent. The result was a mouth that was constantly deteriorating. Teeth were yellow, brittle, and often missing. Infections were common, and toothaches could last for weeks. And when a tooth gave way, there were no dentists, only barbers willing to pull it out with pliers more suited to horseshoes than human mouths. Imagine the dilemma. You are at a fair. You meet someone you know, and by reflex you smile. Within seconds, you notice the uncomfortable looks. Showing a smile full of flaws could be seen as a sign of poverty, bad luck, or even moral corruption. After all, popular beliefs love to associate physical appearance with character. In an environment where appearance already mattered so much, opening your mouth was, in a way, giving up any defense. Today, fluoride toothpaste, dental floss, and regular visits to the dentist are part of our routine. Smiling has become an expression of self-care. But back then, smiling was an act of courage, or perhaps carelessness. Many people learned from an early age to smile with their lips closed, or to avoid smiling altogether in public. And the absence of a smile, far from being interpreted as coldness, was a gesture of social prudence. There is something poetically tragic about this. What should have been a symbol of joy and human connection became a social risk, and all because knowledge had not yet reached the small gestures of everyday life. The next time you smile in the mirror, perhaps you will see this gesture with new eyes. A simple privilege which for centuries was a luxury reserved for a few, and a risk for many. And so we carry on, displaying carefree smiles in a world that, at least in this aspect, has taken some good steps forward. But it is curious to think that, in other times, a sincere smile could be the first step towards a much less pleasant destination. Waking up on a medieval day wasn't accompanied by notifications on your phone or the soothing aroma of coffee. Instead, you might be awakened by a less inviting sound, bells tolling insistently, calling people to the central square. It wasn't a special market, nor a local festival. It was an event that, curiously, brought together all social classes, a spectacle of horror disguised as justice. In other words, a day of public execution. Imagine opening your eyes and knowing that your morning commute could include witnessing someone being hanged, beheaded, or burned in a public square. What's more, not participating was almost an act of civil disobedience. The presence of the community reinforced the message that power was watching, and that order was in constant vigilance. Children, the elderly, shopkeepers, everyone gathered. It was not an optional program, but a brutal reminder of the rules of the game. Today, we seek entertainment on digital platforms and filter the content we consume. In the Middle Ages, the spectacle of death was the content, and the ticket, just being alive and being summoned by the bells. The atmosphere on those mornings was tense. The aroma of fresh bread mixed with the acrid smell of fear, and soon of blood. Conversations were whispered, and looks were anxious and curious. A mixture of repulsion and fascination that, let's face it, has not yet completely abandoned human nature. The contrast with our modern entertainment could not be greater. Today, a suspense series provides us with controlled excitement. There, the horror was real, immediate, and collective, and there was always the shadow of the possibility of being next. An unfounded accusation, a sideways glance, or a misinterpreted comment was enough to turn any citizen into the unwitting protagonist of the next show. Reflecting on this might make our morning rituals a little sweeter. As you make your coffee or choose what to watch, remember that in the old days, the entertainment menu was imposed, and refusing it could be interpreted as defiance. A modern privilege that deserves, at the very least, a quiet acknowledgement. And so we continue, waking up to personalized alarms, free to decide how to start the day. a freedom that many of our ancestors could not even imagine. Perhaps it is worth toasting the chance of having been born in more civilized times. Today, going to the bathroom is such an automatic act that it rarely warrants reflection. But in medieval Europe, this simple physiological necessity was a risky little adventure. Imagine yourself in a bustling city with narrow streets and a non-existent sanitation system. There were no plumbing fixtures or flush toilets. There were buckets, public latrines, and smelly alleys. And the experience was far from private or safe. The alleys served as makeshift latrines. It was common to see people emptying the contents of chamber pots directly out of windows, with little or no warning. "Water, go," was the warning cry. But all it took was a moment of distraction and an unexpected and unpleasant outpour. Walking the streets required keen eyes and quick reflexes. Each step was a careful choreography between suspicious puddles and fresh waste. Public latrines, on the other hand, were sanitary nightmares. Wooden structures over deep holes, shared by dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. The smell was indescribable, and the risk of contracting diseases was extremely high. And as if that weren't enough, there was also the physical danger. Stories of people falling into the pits were not just urban legend. Surviving a trip to the bathroom was, literally, a matter of balance. Today, we have the luxury of choosing between triple-ply toilet paper, heated toilet seats, and soothing fragrances. The bathroom is a small temple of privacy and comfort. To a medieval person, this vision would border on science fiction. The concept of toilet paper didn't even exist. Moss, straw, scraps of cloth, any available resource was used sparingly, and hygiene, naturally, left a lot to be desired. Reflecting on this reality makes our modern toilets even more precious. The next time you flush, perhaps do so with a small smile of gratitude. After all, in the past, a simple act of relief was a daily lottery, with the ultimate prize being to emerge clean and unharmed. And so we continue, comfortably installed in our homes with impeccable sanitary facilities. A detail of modern life that would, without exaggeration, deserve a monument in every city. At least, to remind us that it was not always so simple. Today, when we walk down a street at night, our footsteps are more or less the same. Rubber sneakers, soft soles, a slight muffled sound. But in medieval Europe, the sound of your footsteps was almost a public declaration. Without needing to see, all you had to do was hear to know who you belonged to. The very texture of your clothes, the material of your shoes, and even the rhythm of your walk told a story that no one needed to ask. The nobles, for example, paraded around in heavy fabrics adorned with small bells or metal pieces. Each movement produced a discreet tinkling, a calculatedly audible sound. This was no accident. It was a deliberate strategy to assert their presence. The peasants, on the other hand, walked in rough leather sandals, or even barefoot. Their steps were muffled, almost furtive. But ironically, this absence of sound also betrayed their position. The dark streets amplified this difference. Without streetlights, nighttime sounds were the main way people perceived the world around them, and the sound of footsteps served as a social code. A steady rhythm indicated security and status. Hasty, disorderly steps indicated concern or a lack of privilege. In an environment where everything was observed and judged, even the way you walked could reinforce your place in the hierarchy. Today, we have the freedom to choose our shoes for comfort or style, without fear that they will reveal more than we want them. But imagine a world where every sound your body makes could be interpreted as a clue to your social standing. A ring that jingles as you adjust it, a buckle that clanks as you sit down, a step that reveals more than you would like. Oral privacy was an unknown luxury. And then there were the risks. A commoner who dared to wear fine leather boots could easily be accused of usurping his status. A nobleman who tried to disguise his presence by walking silently could arouse equally dangerous suspicion. It was a constant game of appearances, where even the most involuntary of sounds was loaded with meaning. The next time you walk silently down a hallway, think about this. Your every step could once have been a social sentence. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel a little more free when you hear only the soft sound of your own footstep. Yawning, a gesture as natural as breathing, a harmless sign of tiredness, distraction, or even boredom. But in medieval Europe, this simple movement could be interpreted in much darker ways. It was not just a physiological act. It was an open invitation to judgment and distrust. Superstition permeated every aspect of life, and the body did not escape this watchful eye. It was believed that when yawning, An open mouth allowed spirits to enter or leave. In some regions, it was said that this was the moment when the devil could take advantage of a vulnerable body. Hence the habit of covering one's mouth when yawning, not out of etiquette, but as a protective gesture against the invisible. Not covering one's mouth, an oversight that could be seen as a sign of spiritual impurity or even affiliation with dark forces. Picture the scene. You are at a long, boring mass, incense filling the air and sermons echoing endlessly. A yawn escapes, almost involuntary. Eyes turn. Whispers begin. Is he possessed? Has he been touched by evil? The judgment could be as quick as it was irrational. A banal gesture could become a sign of danger. And as always, rational explanations held little weight against the force of collective superstition. In public spaces, surveillance was even more intense. In markets, meetings, or audiences, any behavior outside of what was expected could be viewed with suspicion. Yawning at an inappropriate time was interpreted as disrespect or worse, a bad omen. In times when the unknown inspired more fear than curiosity, being the target of this type of attention was a high-risk situation. Today, fortunately, we can yawn freely. In a classroom, in a meeting, even in a video like this. At most, we will receive an empathetic look or an understanding smile. But to think that, in another era, a yawn could put your integrity at risk is a curious reminder of how the body has always been a stage for social interpretation. The next time you yawn, especially during a long story like this, you might feel a little liberated. The body expresses itself without fear of veiled accusation. A small modern triumph that deserves, one might say, a celebratory yawn. These days, practices like mindfulness are marketed as modern remedies for stress. Apps with soothing voices invite us to breathe, observe the present, and let go of our worries. But in medieval Europe, no one needed an app to live in the here and now. Mindfulness wasn't a philosophical choice. It was an essential survival tool. Imagine walking through a medieval village. The uneven ground required constant scrutiny. One wrong step could mean a sprained ankle, or worse, an unpleasant encounter with the waste spewing from the windows. Your eyes had to be on the alert. A sudden movement in the shadows, better to quickly identify whether it was a rat, a burglar, or a less friendly soul. Around every corner, the unexpected lurked. Inside the house, the scene was not much different. The candles provided poor lighting, and a careless gesture could cause a fire. Fire was a fragile ally, and vigilance could never be relaxed. Even at mealtimes, full attention was essential. Poisoned bread, adulterated wine, spoiled meat. Each bite required an almost meditative assessment. Eating without thinking was a constant risk. And then there was the human factor. Superstitions, accusations, and rivalries could arise from a simple absent-minded glance. Paying attention to other people's reactions, to the moods of neighbors and authorities, was a constant exercise. An ill-timed comment or a misinterpreted gesture could cost you dearly. Living in a state of alert was the norm, and any slip-up could be exploited. Today, we practice mindfulness in safe environments to reduce anxiety and improve well-being. In the Middle Ages, mindfulness was a fine line between safety and disaster. There was no choice. Every detail of the environment, every sound, every smell, demanded total presence. The mind could not afford to wander too much. Daydreaming, a dangerous luxury. The next time you practice mindfulness, perhaps you can smile with a little more empathy for those who came before. For them, mindfulness was not a technique, but a necessity. And in a way, we are the heirs of that mindfulness, only thankfully with fewer risks and much more comfort. Today, opening a window is almost an automatic gesture. Light enters, air circulates, and with it, we feel the passage of time. Golden mornings, faded afternoons, nights punctuated by stars. But imagine living in a medieval house, made of stone or roughly worked wood, where windows were an architectural privilege. Most villages had only small openings covered with skins, thick cloths or boards. Glass, when it existed, was a luxury item reserved for churches and noble houses. Living in such a space was like existing inside a dark cocoon. Daylight entered timidly, fragmentedly. Often, the only way to know whether it was morning or afternoon came from the front door or some forgotten crack. And the result, the perception of time became hazy, almost dreamlike. Natural cycles lost their power. Within those opaque walls, the hours blurred together, and life was governed more by the sounds of the village than by the movements of the sun. Imagine the psychological impact. Without natural light, the body lacked a stable circadian rhythm. People often slept irregularly, waking and falling asleep several times throughout the night. Long, dark nights encouraged activities around the fire, spinning, sewing, storytelling. but they also fueled fears of the unseen. The pitch black was not a romantic setting, but it was a breeding ground for imagination and legend. Furthermore, the absence of windows reinforced a feeling of isolation. The outside world was a distant concept, accessible only by opening the door. In the winter months, when going out was dangerous, entire families spent entire days confined indoors, lit only by flickering flames. It was a forced confinement, where time seemed to blur, and each day became an exercise in emotional and physical endurance. Today, we value natural light. We know that it affects our mood, our health, our well-being. An apartment with large windows is an almost universal desire. But in medieval Europe, this concept did not even exist. Living with controlled light was an imposition, and the effects of this shaped people's very spirit. Introspection, fear, belief in the supernatural, everything was fueled by this dark environment. The next time you open a window to feel the sun or watch the rain, you might realize how precious this gesture is. A small portal to the world, something that for centuries has been denied to most people, and that, even without realizing it, continues to be one of the simplest and most profound ways of connecting with time and life. Today, sitting down to eat is such a common practice that we hardly give it much thought. Comfortable chairs, polished cutlery, carefully arranged plates. But in medieval Europe, this simple act of sitting down to eat was a carefully reserved privilege. The table was not a democratic space. It was a hierarchical stage where every gesture reinforced power structure. In noble houses, meals were theatrical events. Long oak planks, polished by use and time, occupied the main hall. In the center, the master of the house, surrounded by his closest family and the most prestigious guests. The further away from the head of the table, the less important the diner. The servants, of course, did not even have the right to sit. They ate standing up, when they ate at all, at separate times and places. Now imagine the contrast with peasant life. For most people, tables were a distant luxury. Many families shared a single rustic counter, or even nothing. Eating on the floor, around a piece of cloth or a communal plate, was the norm. There were no individual cutlery. Hands were the main instrument. And meals, although shared, subtly reflected differences in status even within the household. The sensory experience was very different from what we are familiar with. The aroma of roasting meat was rare. The diet was dominated by thin soups, hard breads, and vegetables blackened by time. Meals were not moments of daily celebration, but of necessity. To eat was to survive, and every gesture at the table, every word said or not said, carried clear social implication. On the rare occasions when a peasant was invited to a noble table, usually for exceptional circumstances, etiquette was a minefield. Using the correct plate, knowing when to eat, when to speak, how to carry oneself, every movement was watched. A slip could mean public humiliation or, in extreme cases, royal punishment. Table space was as regulated as the laws that govern the kingdom. Today, the image of a family gathered around a table seems simple, even trivial, but understanding that for centuries this was a symbol of power and exclusivity invites us to take a closer look at our own daily ritual. The next time you sit down to a meal, perhaps you will notice a little of the invisible legacy that persists in this common act. And who knows, a touch of silent gratitude may accompany the first bite of bread. Today, lighting a candle is a simple gesture, a symbol of comfort, romance, or perhaps a moment of reflection. But imagine a medieval Europe where darkness was the norm and light was a precious and, in many cases, controlled resource. Lighting a candle outside of the stipulated hours, or at times considered inappropriate, could be interpreted as a direct challenge to the prevailing order. A small act of resistance hidden beneath the flickering flame. Most homes were plunged into darkness after sunset. The cost of beeswax, or even tallow, made each candle a valuable object. It was not just about lighting the space. It was a question of who could and who could not afford this luxury. In towns and cities, authorities often regulated the use of nightlight. A candle lit in a window could attract suspicion. Was it a signal to conspirators? An invitation to forbidden meetings? Inside the houses, the act of lighting a candle was almost ceremonial. Soot-stained fingers touched the wick, the distinct smell of combustion filling the air. The small, flickering flame cast vivid shadows on the rough walls. Each movement of the fire seemed to whisper ancient secrets. To eyes accustomed to darkness, this dance of light was at once comforting and subversive. Now imagine the tension of doing so when you shouldn't. A young person studying in secret, a couple exchanging forbidden words, an old man writing secret letters. The mere glow of a candle could expose these transgressions. In times of suspicion and control, light became a visual scream, and hastily extinguishing the flame upon hearing footsteps in the hallway was a gesture fraught with fear. The sensory experience of that moment was rich. The crackle of the wax melting, the heat escaping discreetly, the pungent smell that permeated fabrics and hair. The darkness around seemed even denser, as if conspiring against that small pocket of rebellion. But it was also a moment of silent courage. Every second of light stolen from the night was an affirmation of the human will to see, to understand, to exist despite the rules. Today, surrounded by constant and abundant electric light, we forget the symbolic power of the flame. But there is something deeply human in contemplating a lit candle, a tenuous link with those who, centuries ago, dared to keep a tiny spark alive in the heart of darkness. And perhaps, the next time we light a candle, we can feel a faint echo of that indomitable spirit. Imagine a normal afternoon. The sun is struggling to break through thick clouds and humid air. You approach a crowded square, the beating heart of a medieval city. The market. At first glance, it looks like a vibrant scene, full of life. But don't be fooled. To our modern senses, trained in air-conditioned environment and clean supermarket aisles, this would be an overwhelming shock. The sound arrives first. A tangle of voices in constant dispute, each vendor trying to overpower the other. Hoarse shouts announce fresh fish, smoked meats, day-old bread, although the definition of fresh here is quite elastic. Bells jingle, horses neigh, and the creaking of carts accompanies a chorus of metallic noises. It is a dense, almost palpable chaos of sound, where silence is an impossibility. Then, the smell, a frontal assault on the sense of smell. Fish exposed to the sun, coagulated blood dripping from hanging meat, grass crushed underfoot, human sweat, wood smoke, and excrement mixed with the mud of the streets. The air is a soup of aromas that swirl and collide, creating unexpected and almost hallucinatory combinations. Breathing deeply would be a beginner's mistake. Visually, the market is a living, breathing tapestry, ever-changing. Colorful fabrics sway in the wind. Piles of fruit and vegetables jostle for space with baskets of bread and mounds of spices. But everything is precarious. FLIs reign supreme, landing confidently on everything on display. And each transaction takes place amid a dance of bargaining and distrust. Tight pockets, quick hands, ever alert eyes. Now imagine yourself, a modern visitor, trying to make your way through this scene. Your mind is saturated with the cacophony. Your stomach is contracting with each new breath of air. Your body is trying to find an impossible rhythm amidst the coming and going of the crowd. It wouldn't last long. A sensory breakdown would be inevitable. What for a medieval person was the routine of survival, for us would be an extreme test of endurance. And then there were the risks. Pockets were constantly picked. The lack of clear laws made the market a territory for foul play. One wrong turn of the eye and your money would be gone. Arguments broke out easily, and the sound of a drawn dagger was not uncommon. The afternoon at the market was a battlefield disguised as a fair. Today, we walk down aisles with soft soundtracks and controlled lighting. We read labels, scan barcodes. But in each of these conveniences, there is a subtle echo of the memory of times when buying and selling was an act of daily courage. The next time you push a shopping cart, you might remember that other world, where a simple afternoon at the market was a trial by fire. And those who left in one piece at the end of the day were worthy of celebration. Now that the dust has settled on the cobblestone streets, and the echoes of the markets have faded into the night, perhaps we can breathe a little deeper. For 2 hours, we have traveled together through a world where every simple gesture, a yawn, a smile, a step carried invisible risks, where surviving an ordinary day was, in itself, an admirable achievement. A time when fear was woven into routine, and small comforts, like a lit candle or a hot bath, could feel like acts of daring. And yet, even amidst all this hardship, there was humanity. There was muffled laughter in dark taverns, calloused hands that shared bread with care, eyes that sought hope in the flickering dance of a flame. It is curious to think how our own daily rituals, sitting at a table, opening a window, walking in silence, are distant legacies of these lives intertwined by time. If this journey has resonated with you, well, there's plenty more where that came from. The past holds unfathomable stories, full of little details that help us perhaps to appreciate the present a little more. If you felt that this video brought you a little calm curiosity, or even a slight fascination for what we were, know that other trips like this always await you here. So before you settle in for a rest, or perhaps another story, consider subscribing to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of quiet journey. And if you'd like, Let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight and what time it is. It's always comforting to imagine this silent network of curious minds, connected by the subtle thread of history. Now might be a good time to adjust the lights in your room. Play some soft music in the background, perhaps a white noise machine or a low-key fan, and simply allow the night to envelop you. Let the distant echoes of medieval Europe fade away like an ancient dream, and let sleep come as lightly as a scroll slowly being unwrapped. Until the next journey, I'll be here whenever you want to come back.